pensée, oh, Walia, je me réveille dans les rues, oh, Walia, le soleil ne me touche pas, mais ça va, tout va changer demain. C'est le goût de la terre, oh, Walia, que j'adore et je déteste, oh, Walia, tu me manques ma chérie, mais ça va, tout va changer demain. Oh ouais, tout va changer demain. Oh ouais, tout va changer demain. Oh Walia, Walia, oh, Walia, Walia. Tout va changer demain. 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 Ça va, tout va changer demain. Demain on va commencer. Walia, tu vas venir ici. Walia, c'est pas vrai mais ça va. Mais ça va, tout va changer demain. Oh ouais, tout va changer demain. Oh ouais, tout va changer demain. 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 Changer demain. Tout va changer demain. Tout va changer demain. Tout va changer demain. Dankeschön.
the warmest of welcomes to our NECE community joining us for the NECE Conference 2020 virtually. Firstly, I'd like to say many thanks to our exceptional musical accompaniment today, a Berlin-based band live with us here at the BCC Conference Center, Il Civetto. Thank you. And secondly, I'd like to introduce a colleague of mine, Dirk Hulverscheidt, who is a facilitator accompanying us also for the next 2 days. Dirk, over to you.
Thanks so much. And this is my wonderful colleague, Tanja Murphy-Ilibasic, and we will be together hosting and guiding you through the next 2 days. This year, everybody knows that everything is very different. So the same happened also to the NECE conference. And we will have, I think, a very nice program lined up on it, all based on a hybrid format around it here. And of course, we would have loved to all welcome you here in Berlin and have this conference in presence. But of course, it's not possible at the moment. So Tanja, what do we have? How's this going to work, this hybrid thing?
So we have a selection of technology that we're going to be using over the next 3 days in total. We have a handful of people here with us, and we will be welcoming some live guests later on here to the stage. For the technology, we're going to be using live streaming, we're going to be using video conferencing, and we're going to be using an interactive platform so that you can participate in the workshops, you can add your voice to what is being said, and hopefully get the impression that it's almost the same as being live. So, 2 things I'd like to mention is that the hashtags, in fact, if you are on social media for Twitter and for Facebook, we have one hashtag which is NECE 2020, and the second one is the hashtag Digital NECE. Please feel free, add your voice to the social media, spread the word, it would be wonderful. If you have any information you would like to find, go to the NECE conference webpage, that's www.nece-conference 2020. Oh, sorry, no, that's wrong. Excuse me. Yeah. It's www.nece-conference.eu. That was correct now. Okay. Thank you, Dirk. Would you
Thanks so much, Tanja. Yeah, so for today, we have our program. First of all, I think we will get a warm welcome from all the organizing parties and institutions around it there, and Christoph is already standing here. Afterwards, we will have a young stakeholder challenge, where there's been lots of young people across Europe been actually proposing their ideas and visions for Europe. We will get a sneak preview of what's to come for us in the future there. Followed by that, we will have an opening talk around the lessons learned, citizenship education, art and culture for a sustainable world. This will be a panel talk on live stream here, and then followed up later on by a keynote by the marvelous Maja Göpel, talking about rethinking our world and connecting it to education and civic education processes around it there. So that's our program for the afternoon. Stay tuned, and let's hand it over to Christoph and Anne.
Yes, thanks Dirk and Tanja for this great intro into the technical setting and the housekeeping in that audience hall in Berlin, which is both online and offline at the same time. So a warm welcome to all of you and to our more than 700 viewers following this event at the moment, possibly many more on live stream. And on our screens, I say hello and welcome to Lavens, joining us from Brussels. I say hello to Sheila Nabachwa from Kampala, Uganda. I say hello to Ziad from Beirut and Christine from Tbilisi in Georgia. And last but not least, to Sam Kibizi from Marseille. We will hear from all of you in a minute. Let me start here with a big thank you to all our partners who helped us organize that event in the framework of Germany's EU presidency in the past months. Not only the Goethe Institute, our strategic partner, but also a great number of networks, foundations, think tanks and NGOs who have supported this event, both intellectually and financially. And I would also like to give a hand to the great organizing team, both at my Agency, the BPB, the Federal Agency for Civic Education, and of course the Lab Concepts Agency. What a great job you did in putting all that together in the past months, against all odds, one has to say, and you are still doing that great job as we speak. So it's my great pleasure really to kick off our conference in 2020. A year, Dirk mentioned it, in which the world has changed and is still changing for all of us in a way, in more than one way. We opened this conference just hours after the poll stations in the US have closed, and we still are holding our breath or biting our nails. And we opened it also against the background of a series of horrific events and the murder of innocent citizens in Europe, from Paris to Nice and Vienna. And really, let's not forget the 35 students murdered in Kabul only days ago. So what better reason and time, I would argue, to convene in such a conference, as we all need, I think, an open and warm space, even if it's a digital one, which we can use in the great tradition of NECE. First, as a learning opportunity for all of us, because we all need to learn how to adapt to this brand new situation. And secondly, of course, a networking tool. And last but not least, yes, a roadshow of the best citizenship education, formal, non-formal, informal, can offer both in theory as in practice and in terms of ideas, of course. So this hub of transnational learning and exchange should be the place to be for all of us, at least for the next 2 days. And that's why, simply because that's a watershed year for citizenship education in Europe, as we claim in our NECE declaration, which we all invite you to sign. Just check out the website nece.eu. And more than ever, key competences of citizenship are required to cope with the pandemic. Governments, for example, rely on citizens to deal with uncertainty or to think critically as to distinguish the reliable from the misinformation. To give just 2 examples, citizenship education certainly needs to be prioritized more than ever by the European Union, by national and local governments alike, by all of us, if you like. So it's not a nice to have addition, but really an indispensable part of all education in a democracy. So on that note, I'm welcoming you again. Please stay tuned. I'm looking forward to 2 more great panels today and to a great number, a rich variety of sessions tomorrow, and an open space on November 7 with Susanne Ulrich, and of course the closing panel with representatives of the European Union and the Council of Europe to discuss the NECE declaration I just mentioned. So join NECE, keep well, and with that, over to you, Anne, and our partners. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christoph. From Brussels, I would like to thank everyone who made this conference possible. It took a great deal of flexibility, creativity, and technical know-how for this hybrid conference on citizenship education to take place, so that we can stay connected, learn from each other, and share experiences, thanks to the very interesting and diverse program of the coming days. At a time when democracy and its institutions are under pressure, the sense of urgency for citizenship education is becoming more and more clear. Democracies are ill-equipped to deal with long-term issues. Its basic norms are challenged by populists. Polarization is rising. Trust in the democratic system is very low. According to the Eurobarometer, only 39% of Belgians have confidence in the national government, 42% in parliament, and only 19% in political parties. Confidence in the political system is very low at present, figures that are not very different in other European countries. But not only trust is a challenge. Citizens in our European democracies are rarely prevented from participating, but the feeling that they can actually make a difference is often lacking in low-educated and low-income groups. Empowerment to feel that they can make a difference and the development of the skills to do so are crucial. Raising awareness about the importance and the challenges of democracy and society, and empowering to ensure that everyone can participate equally are what citizenship education should and can strive for. The Bellevue does this with workshops for schools and trainings and tools for teachers, but being part of NECE enables us to exchange experiences and learn from each other in order to improve our methods and approach. In an ever-changing society, this is indispensable but also very enriching. The Bellevue is therefore very excited about the program of the coming days and hope that you are as well. So thank you again for making this possible. Enjoy and be inspired. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. That was great statement from Brussels. And so I'm pretty pleased, of course, to welcome our partners all over the world, as I just mentioned. Let's kick it off with Sheila from Kampala in Uganda. Would you like to say a few words, greeting the audience? I think that's not Sheila. So we are still waiting for an unmute sound, of course.
Thank you so much, Christoph. Thank you so much, our friends from NECE. This is a message from the Civic Education Network for Eastern and Southern Africa. Imagine all the way from Africa, miles apart, and yet together in the same room. Thank you so much for inviting us. Congratulations to NECE. We really, really look forward to reconnecting again, as the theme says of our conference. We look forward to reconnecting again. We look forward to learning and listening on how civic education can take a central role in addressing the challenges by COVID. Lastly, we look forward to the solidarity that we shall see together with NECE, together with CENESA and NECE in and after this conference. Thank you very much, and congratulations and greetings from CENESA.
Thanks so much, Sheila, for this great statement, and really we all hope for that reconnection, as you said. So next on my list is Christina Kandelaki from NECE, joining us from Tbilisi in Georgia. Welcome, Christina.
Hello, I'm happy to welcome you on the NECE Annual Conference on behalf of NECE, that's Eastern European Network of Citizenship Education. NECE is honored to participate in this event organized by NECE, our mother organization. In this unusual and challenging era, citizenship education has become one of the most important instruments for formation of democratic and human-oriented society. And I'm sure we all believe that citizenship education ought to be at the top of political priorities on all levels, as it is a way to democracy, equality, tolerance, responsibility, peace, and sustainable development, of course. We all should promote citizenship education because, as NECE believes, this is the art of living together. This is our slogan for this year. As we live in a global world, and recent experiences, especially COVID-19 pandemic, have proven it once more, we all should elaborate ways of living together that we NECE somehow see as an art. And we people gathered here as artists should find various creative ways for engaging young people and other generations in civic education, for spreading citizenship values as far and as deep as possible. So let's endorse and appreciate citizenship education once more and practice the art of living together. Wish you interesting and fruitful days with NECE Conference 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, for really thinking of civic education as an art, and I think it's a great and appropriate term, so to say, to look at our profession as something artistic and creative, with lots of creativity. So let's move on to Beirut. Ziad Hadara from NECE is joining us. Welcome, Ziad.
Thank you, Christoph. Good afternoon from Beirut, everybody, and greetings on behalf of NECE, the Arab Network for Civic Education, the small but growing sister of NECE. We are the sister, not the daughter, like the Arab. I'm happy that this conference and the material that I was reading and the background material is renewing the emphasis on civic education. And very hopeful that since our two regions are neighbors and interlinked around the Mediterranean, that some of that renewed energy and renewed momentum around civic education will spill over to our side as well. For sure, it's very much needed right now. We're facing amazingly challenging times. The challenges are enormous. I understand from the NECE declaration that I read that the relaunch of the EU, as you say, needs to be not only economic, but also democratic. I would also add and stress that a major effort and emphasis should be given to the issue of identity and belonging in today's societies. For sure, this issue is a huge ongoing concern for us here in the Middle East, as we struggle still with what defines a national identity and how does that coexist with all sorts of religious identities, of other global and regional trends. There's a lot of competition for identity, but also the very unfortunate events that have happened recently in France and also in Vienna remind us that this issue of identity and belonging is also very much a European and probably also a global concern. So we all seem to have now this nagging, difficult question that is common to both our regions, but to all regions, which is how to define identity in today's world, an identity that is anchored in national pride and common societal values, but one that also acknowledges human rights and diversity and other trends. So I look forward to fruitful conversations around these issues, future collaborations with NECE, but also with all the other networks. But for now, I'd like to wish you all a great conference. I look forward to participating in many of the events myself. Good luck and enjoy.
Thanks, Ziad, and thanks really for pointing out urgent and really toxic issues like national identity. And I really want to point out that we will have a workshop, a joint workshop of CENISA, NECE and INSEE on that question tomorrow. So check out the program again, and of course you will get more input on that questions. So let's go to Marseille now. Sam Kibisi is there, joining us, and director of Les Têtes de l'Art, creative and cultural educational enterprise in Marseille. So I'm looking forward to your statement, Sam. Great to have you.
I'm really happy to be with you guys because, as you know, we had the chance to welcome the NECE Conference 2 years ago in Marseille, and it was a great moment. Actually, in France, we have, like in other countries, 100 reasons to be sad and anxious about the situation. But we have also, in front of that, thousands of reasons to be full of hope. We had our time of minutes of silence in all the schools, in all the places in France. But now it's time to get our voices louder, because we have to share the real challenges and the real solution. For what I saw in the media in the last day, it was only question about the failure of our security and justice system, etc. But no one stressed the real challenges of education. And it's also our role together to stress this huge challenge we have to face together, to push the question of citizenship education, formal and informal, together. I'm also proud of announcing in the beginning of this conference that what we've done in 5 years, following the NECE different debates about the AGCM. It's a network dedicated to the youth in the Mediterranean that we are about to launch at the end of the month, a new youth assembly of the Mediterranean. And what I want to conclude with is there is no strong Europe without a close relation and fruitful cooperation with the Mediterranean in general. So Mediterranean is not out of the European debate, and we have to work together. And thanks also to all the networks, the Sisters Network, as Ziad mentioned, that we're collaborating together. So let's go and deeper our collaboration together. Good conference for all. Thank you.
Sam, thanks so much. And really, I think all these statements show that NECE is not an inward-looking, Eurocentric network, but really tries to reach out to the world, so to say. And we are so happy to have all of you at our side, basically, and in order to open up and to enrich our ideas and formats. And so we hope to move on in that direction in the coming years, and of course during that conference as well. So on that note, let me hand it over back to our moderators, Tanja and Dirk.
Thanks so much, Christoph. Let's go and switch over to the youth. The next program point is the Youth Stakeholder Challenge. And it's a program called MyNewEurope, which is a European idea contest, a joint initiative by the Federal Agency for Civic Education and the Robert Bosch Foundation. They've been on a search for young voices and fresh ideas for a more sustainable and democratic Europe in a post-COVID world. They found so many great, amazing ideas and contributions that it's basically impossible to showcase them all here during the conference. So we can only give you a sneak preview, and we will have a dedicated event on the campus format at the end of November around it there. Now, the winners will receive a professional coaching support of actually taking their ideas further forward here in Berlin, and will get an invitation to the next NECE 2021 conference. And of course, if we can have it face-to-face, travel will be paid for, and let's see if we can get there. But let's go and have a look at the 4 contributions as a sneak preview.
Firstly, our society depends on nature, but instead of looking after it, we are consuming it at an unsustainable rate. Secondly, national governments and the EU have become bureaucratically complicated in a way that excludes youth. The Global Youth Biodiversity Network challenges these issues by getting young people involved in national and international decision-making bodies on biodiversity. As the European Regional Chapter, we want to bring together civil societies, national governments, and young people through capacity-building workshops, which help young people understand democratic processes, follow relevant decision-making, and hold their governments accountable to its promises. In this way, we can combine the passion of young people with the experience of older generations in order to be able to push for a society that lives in harmony within nature. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Christian Ovidiu-Chemertan. I'm 17 years old, and I studied Kulturama here in Stockholm, Sweden. From a small age, I was very passionate about dance, music, theater, and movies. When I found out about MyNewEurope, I was very excited because this is a unique opportunity to combat an important social problem through art. And my project is about combating populism, fake news, and infodemic. There are several short artistic videos that will enable people to find out the friendly and accessible explanation of concepts, to analyze bad practices and real examples along with different countries, and what are the consequences for those countries/communities. Each episode will have as a protagonist an artist and a young person that will discuss a special concrete story for an art allegory and will combat fake news, populism, and infodemic. Thank you very much.
Today's Europe is an orchestra out of sync, the result a cacophony of noise rather than a symphonic expression of shared objectives. Hi, my name is Gigi Migliazzo, and I'm currently a student at Erasmus University in the Netherlands. Since moving to Europe last year, I've come to realize the pervasive existence of social inequality that exists both within and between the Union's countries. A sustainable Europe can only be achieved when all Europeans collaborate on an agenda for change, not just an elitist group of decision makers with a limited understanding of the population. As such, I propose a campaign for equality that exposes Europe's vulnerabilities but equally reveals its future potential. The Symphony of Europe lets play the same score. This call to action will be reflected in the perspectives of Europeans from distinct backgrounds. Music offers connection without boundaries, thus such a metaphor will signify the potential for Europeans to find harmony in diversity. The potential for an equal Europe will be realized only when minorities are given the platform to share their realities. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Isabella, and I'm very glad to present to you a little bit of my amazing idea. First of all, I'm part of Station Europe, a brand new organization that was created during this pandemic. Climate change is a topic that is not addressed as much as we want to in Romania. That's why we want to mix education with technology, because we know children are in love with vlogging. Moreover, we have in mind that Romania has assumed in its strategy, in its long-term strategy, this objective of a more sustainable future. We want to touch communities of children that are not helped nowadays, to raise awareness and also to gain more knowledge on subjects that really matter. They don't have chances. That's why we create the chances for them. Furthermore, we all know how important the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are. We want to rethink the idea of cool on the internet. We want to rethink the idea of vlogging. We are inviting you on a bold voyage.
Hello everyone, my name is Zoom, and I'm a second year student of Erasmus University Rotterdam, and I study media and communication, and I'm really glad to be a part of the NECE's challenge this year. My idea is to build a website for vulnerable people, for those who are suffering from poverty or unemployment or digital divide due to in the COVID-19 situation. And the website will serve as a place for knowledge exchange, for information, and to build a relationship between NGOs or any voluntary individuals who are willing to make a donation or who are willing to provide solutions for these vulnerable people. And my idea is built on the belief that in order to reach sustainable goals, we cannot leave anyone behind. So the main purpose of this project is to reduce inequality. I hope you like my idea, and thank you for listening.
Great, thanks so much. It's so inspiring to see the next generation take the fate into their hands and coming up with such fresh ideas. Can't wait to see them all at the end of November in the dedicated session. I think we have a short music intermission before we continue with our opening talk.
Assassina mayanta couché couché le sabori au catch tous les fleurs sont la 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 écoutez nos sabori au catch niesi bla mangia pare pare le sabori au catch mais tout le monde de la mina del maro sala perdonez-lui avec les mains dans les rues, vers dans les nuits, vers dans les nuits. Jamais avec les verres dans les nuits, vers 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 dans les nuits, on m'a mayantamane.
You go first? Yeah.
Okay, welcome to the opening talk. We're about to introduce the panelists to you, but before we do that, we'd like to just give you an idea of the two main focuses, the key questions that have been collected for this panel that we're about to launch. So the first focus is on what concrete role can citizenship education, arts and culture play in meeting the challenges of the pandemic and climate change, and for positive social change. What solutions, in terms of new discourses, approaches and strategies, can citizenship education, art and culture offer to meet these challenges? Our second focus is on what lessons should, or in fact must, we learn from this pandemic for the educational and cultural life of our societies. What have we gained? What have we lost? Can we already take stock? According to Friedrich Hölderin, can we apply to the world today a quote, "Where there is danger, the element of rescue also grows." Do we have any indications of this?
Thanks so much, Tanja. And we have a couple of our strategic partner organizations here on the stage and live on the Zoom talk joining us in the virtual setting around it here. Notably, it's the Goethe Institute, which has been a long-term partner, a very warm welcome, and the Prince Claus Foundation, which is joining us virtually around it here. They've created this or initiated this wonderful Take Me to the River exhibition that we're going to hear a lot more about a little bit later on. And then also the German Federal Foreign Agency is also joining us, which has also been a long-term partner of the NECE program, and especially the cultural policy is becoming an ever more important element of the policy and diplomatic mixes around it there. So we're very, very curious to hear lots of different perspectives around it here. Let's go and introduce our panelists personally.
Thank you. So to kick off the introductions, I'd like to introduce Johannes Ebert, the General Secretary of the Goethe Institute in Germany. A warm wave from his side.
Yeah. And then we have live joining us on Zoom, Maja Göpel, who is an arts and culture consultant and the curator of the exhibition. Can we see Maja Göpel on the screen?
Hello, everyone.
Great. Very warm welcome.
So, also joining us on a Zoom call is Joumana El Zein Khoury, the director of the Prince Claus Fund for Culture and Development in the Netherlands. Welcome.
Great. And from the German Foreign Office is Andreas Görgen, the head of the Directorate General for Culture and Communication at the office, and you have a special focus in our topics.
And to wrap up our round of introductions, I'd also like to wish a very warm welcome to Thomas Krüger, the Director of the Federal Agency for Civic Education in Germany. And here we also have a wave. So we will be using translators, or rather interpreters, for this call. And I'm going to be addressing now some questions in German to Thomas Krüger, and these will then be translated in the live stream. Okay? So, Herr Krüger. Welches ist Ihre wichtigste Lehre aus der Corona-Krise für Demokratie, politische Bildung und nachhaltige Entwicklung?
In terms of education and cultural life, both societies. Maybe you can also give us a personal insight.
It's a really painful experience that social contacts are limited or reduced. This is really bad because social contacts are really important, especially for political activities. We need them. But what we've learned regarding our learnings, I can say that the digital possibilities are transnational. We can communicate in a transnational way, and borders aren't important anymore. We stay in touch even though we are in a very bad situation right at the moment, but we try to give a sign to show that another life is possible. So thank you very much, Mr. Ebert. You are the director of a network of cultural institutes. So what role should art and culture play in shaping the current social transformation processes, and what is the most important challenge for you as head of worldwide network of cultural institutes? So I think we need to open up, we need to create spaces and areas for new ideas, for encounters of people, and we need to support them. So I think it's really important in this current situation to definitely be aware of this task. And we have 157 institutes in more than 90 countries, and what we try to do is to stay in touch with our partners, even though because we know the partners are under pressure financially speaking, and we need to what we would like to do is to support them, to keep on funding them, and to face the challenges. So the pandemic is a huge challenge we definitely have to face. We know that digitalization is important. We need to move online, not only language courses, but also other offers. Now we have to think about the future. What can we do in the future? What did we learn, or what are we about to learn, or what will be in the future?
So I'd like to direct the next questions to Maja El Khalil. What new multidisciplinary approaches can artists develop under the impact of the pandemic and in the context of the debate on climate change?
Thank you. I'm going to start with explaining the reason why I am here today. Is that in 2018, the Prince Claus and the Fund and the Good Institute have launched a call for cultural and artistic responses to environmental change. Now, they awarded 15 projects grants to work with collectives in indigenous and local communities in Central and South America, the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia. I was asked to curate this exhibition where the stories from these collaborations could be brought together in a physical format. And it was supposed to open today in Berlin. But the pandemic, some projects were delayed, and we had reverted to the platform, which will hopefully to launch in early December. The title of this exhibition is Take Me to the River. It is inspired by a beautiful song. But in this case, it moves to the crucial role and the crucial need to leave the comfort of our viewpoint. I'm not sure if you can still hear me.
Yes? Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm sorry, I got silenced. Okay. So it is important to leave the comfort of our viewpoint, to reach out and to listen to alternative stories by local and indigenous communities, and to reconnect with nature. Now, each project relies on the perspective of communities living the harshest realities of the climate emergency. These communities suffer, yet they also possess intimate and irreplaceable knowledge of abused environment, knowledge that we can learn from. Beyond collaboration, these projects express ways of word-making, of countering the narrow individualism that we operate within. Now, we talk about collaborations, we talk about communities, we talk about interdisciplinary, whether cultural and scientific disciplines. These are all concepts that are all the more important today in the current planetary crisis, and at a time when fear is creating self-centered perspectives. Friedrich Hayek, who was with us last week, said, democratize democracies to deal with climate change. And two of the fundamental tenets of democracies are an informed public who have access to unfiltered, non-manipulated, factual information, and an educated population that can process this information and act upon it. The majority of people on this planet live in undemocratic systems. All of the 15 grantees work with communities whose voices have been muffled, even muted. As artists, they open alternative channels to empower these communities to fight extraction, deforestation, and the population and the pollutions of their rivers. So to answer the question, what new multidisciplinary approaches can artists develop? Having experienced 9 months and counting of social distancing, where we have all been a part just when movements were coming together in solidarity to protest against racism, discrimination, inequality, climate change, artists are constantly finding imaginative ways to keep us connected, to find alternative channels of communication, and not only to make visible abuse, extraction, excess, but also to help us imagine ways to shape a different future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that personal perspective. Dirk, back to you.
Thanks so much. And I would like to move on to Joumana El Zein Khoury, which is also joining us via Zoom. And I would like to hear from you a little bit more about the Prince Claus Fund. Could you perhaps share a few words? And then in particular, we are interested how can spaces be created for artificial reflection, sensitization for climate change, and possible solutions in the fight against climate change. Over to you.
Expression that's under pressure. So wherever there's pressure in the world for culture, that's where we go and we work and we support our partners. And throughout our almost 25 years of supporting culture under pressure, and pressure for us can mean conflict, it can mean environmental challenges, such as what we're doing to now with the Goethe Institute. What we've seen is the amazing way that artists and cultural spaces have to bring very far away or closer by problems and issues and humanize them and bring them much closer to where we are in a way that we are able to grasp them better and understand them better and relate to them better. But apart from that, they're also able, through their creative approach, through their understanding of what is really necessary in the context where they're living in, what kind of innovative and different kind of solutions, and sometimes very simple solutions, can be taken in order to tackle difficult issues such as climate change. And that's really what we see in the projects that Maja has beautifully curated for us.
And to wrap up this round of individual questions, I'd like to address a couple of in German to Andreas Görgen. Was kann die auswärtige Kulturpolitik, insbesondere im Zuge der EU-Ratspräsidentschaft, zur Bewältigung der aktuellen Herausforderungen beitragen? Welchen Beitrag
does it already make? This is the big question.
Welchen Beitrag leistet sie schon? Bitte schön.
Vielen Dank. Das ist ja eine Frage mit ganz vielen Substantiven.
This is a very interesting question.
Okay, so kann man das auch
The beauty of the life.
Indem sie herauskommt aus dem Denken, dass Kulturpolitik.
So what we need to do is we need to get out of the context. So we should not only focus at national states or nation states. No, cultural policy is also important for society and social policy, and also for European policies, of course. So Europe is made of different states, smaller states, nation states, and some of the states or countries haven't understood yet that they definitely need to join the European Union or be able to cross borders, to think outside the box, to not only focus at their own issues or problems, but also to think about the European idea. This is important. So what we need to do is that Europe stands together, that we join forces, that we create this idea of a European culture. So in the past we talked about foreign cultural policy, but this isn't a foreign policy issue anymore, because what we need to do is to create a cultural space, a cultural policy for the European Union. So NECE, the Goethe Institute, and also the social society need to be included in this idea. We need to translate these ideas into policy, and I think we definitely have a mission, and this mission is what Mr. Ebert saw, creating these spaces for thought, for exchange, this room for maneuver. This is what we definitely need to focus on. We have to focus on diversity and sustainability in our society, and I think in doing this we can definitely create a great basis, a good foundation for European cultural policy.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
We have 2 discussion rounds, each of 10 minutes. I'm going to introduce the topics of the first discussion round in German, and these are going to be directed to Thomas Krüger and Andreas Görgen. And I'm going to read you the questions now. The translation will be done automatically. Welche Lehren sollten und müssen wir bisher aus der Pandemie für das Bildungs- und
Which lessons do we have to draw for the civic and cultural life of our societies? Are education and culture at risk of becoming an endangered species in a currently threatened world dominated by political tensions? Examples are the essential nature of culture and education for a transformation, culture and resilience, the contribution of the political sector to art and artists. You have the floor. Well, I think that the challenge, especially when it comes to the area of education, is huge. And let me give you an example. Education is, with its reference to pedagogy, the discipline of human sciences that implies societal changes and always focuses on them. And as a consequence, you should figure out how education works nowadays. We do no longer have a situation where you have one teacher, a pedagogue, that is confronted with students. Today, educational processes are often based on collaborative processes. What does this mean? It means that education does no longer work without participation, without the involvement of students. So teachers become accompanying instructors and students become active shareholders who co-shape education. And this is a huge input also towards democratic education, because there are many different perspectives and interests that are included into the learning processes, and they sort of enroll into these educational processes. And this, based on sustainability, has the direct claim for societal pluralization and democratization. And I really hope that civic education, citizenship education, as we have co-shaped it, as we have experienced it, can make a significant contribution. Well, I would also like to say a few words about education. When you're saying that we question whether education is essential for the system, it's wrong. No, education is not to just satisfy individual needs, something that you buy. No, education, first and foremost, is training in terms of societal life. How do I fit in society? So culture and education, are they essential for the system? I think this question is wrong. There is no society without the freedom of art and without education. And I think we should move away from this individualistic standpoint and Sorry, the sound is not really good. So society is in charge of providing educational opportunities. And the second aspect brings me back to what I just said about Europe. We want to be world open Europe. We want a country that is open to the world and that is successful because we have such great diversity. And what we have seen and learned with the pandemic is an acceleration of renationalization tendencies. And I think this is rather a political mandate to counteract these renationalization tendencies and to intentionally say and accept that the diversity of origins, the diversity of attitudes are the foundation for a democratic society. And then you get an idea of why the area of cultural education, intercultural education, and education as a whole, and the freedom of art are so important, especially at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much for those insights. And we'd actually like to now move on to the second round of discussion. And these questions are directed at Johannes Ebert, Maja El Khalil, and Joumana El Zein Khoury, who are still with us on the Zoom link.
Great. So the second role is all about the role of the arts and culture in sustainability. And sustainability is also a cultural topic and a cultural question around it there. We are really interested in and to see how can artistic and cultural approaches actually drive ecological cultural change. And Maja, I've heard that you've brought actually a couple of pictures for us to look at as well while you share a few thoughts.
You're muted.
Just one second, we're still waiting for the sound to come.
Okay.
Wonderful, we can hear you.
All right. I'm just waiting for the movie to play. I think somebody needs, I'm not sure who's going to share it. No? Okay, I'm sorry, there's supposed to be a film that is played while I'm talking, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to start talking about a connection that the German art historian Dorothea van Hantelmann referred to. She cited a relationship between the success of the modern museum and the failures of the climate response. Now, the modern mindset today, we cultivate an individual that is isolated from the world. So, and more specifically, isolated from nature. And when we are isolated from nature, this is when we can abuse. Nature today is object of abuse. People have started a movement to fight back by giving nature judicial rights, rivers as subject of rights. Martin Andreu mentored 5 filmmakers to reflect on the Atrato River as a subject rather than an object. Now, we are still definitely a very long way from this movement taking effect globally. Meanwhile, nature is fighting back all around us. Nature is prosecuting us, as we can see from, now we'll see them from these pictures from Arco d'Ato, where water is an aggressor in the delta between Bangladesh and India. These communities live the harshest results of the climate change. They have to survive poisoned rivers, burning forests, rising water, and submerged villages. Humanity is sentenced. The projects that have been funded by the Prince Claus Fund and the Goethe Institute bring forth a motion to recover. On a positive note, in Mexico and the Caribbean, Gilberto Esparza is combining art and science to produce structures that operate within the confine of the coral, to rescue corals. In Peru, we have the Adrian Hartel Montalvo, who's working with the Shipibo community to transfer techniques of filmmaking for these individual communities, to use these films to amplify their voices and to preserve their way of life. Talked about nature as object of abuse. Nature prosecutes. Humanity sentenced. Motion to recover. there are 4 of the 5 narratives that we are using together to interrelate the results of these 15 projects and Take Me to the River. Now, it's not enough for the public to be sensitized. And it's the way it is not enough in times of crisis for the artist to just make things visible. We are all implicated. Nature has to become globally and universally a subject of rights. I will just invite you tomorrow, because the 5 artists are going to be talking more in depth about their project tomorrow at between 4 and 5:30 European time. And they will discuss their project, and they will share their interdisciplinary perspective on climate change. We will have Virginie Dupré from the Congo, Adrian Hartel Montalvo from Peru, Mehran Davari from Iran, and Auguste Anayes from Brazil.
Thanks so much, Maja, for those powerful pictures, and sorry that they didn't show right from the very beginning. And it's always great to see how those kind of projects and pictures actually make a very, very fact-driven situation all of a sudden experienceable by society. And it's great to see how this can actually drive some cultural change. Joumana, would you like to add a few things around it there of really how can the artistic and the cultural approaches drive that change as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I remember that when Johannes and myself, we met for the first time to think about this collaboration that the Prince Claus and the Goethe Institute would bring together. For us, the environmental issue and the environmental theme was really, I think we decided on it quite quickly. And what we were very interested in is basically putting a net out there and seeing what would come in when you do an open call asking for artists from around the world to submit proposals and projects that are linked to the environment. We really didn't know what would come back. And it has been quite astounding, actually, when we saw the diversity of the projects that came in, the quality of the projects that came in, and the power of the projects that came in. And from what Maja has just shown us, you can see how artists are not only documenting the effects that climate change has, but also thinking on what kind of solutions can be brought in, giving a voice to the indigenous in order to see, what kind of culture that we are not familiar with can be brought in order to find new solutions for the climate change, and how the different regions around the world are dealing with it and what type of problems they're dealing with. And it's kind of, there's a very negative side to it, because you see the effects that climate change and the horrible aspects that climate change is bringing throughout the world, but you also see the positive energy and the positive thinking that all of these artists and cultural spaces are putting in order to educate us, to not let us forget, and to give us hope. And that is, I think, what this collaboration with the Goethe Institute has been so strong about and has brought to the forefront. In any case, for me personally, and for a lot of the people that I know who are working at the office, at the Prince Claus, but also a lot of our partners who have been looking at these projects, etc. So that's where my 2 cents.
Thanks so much, Joumana. You mentioned the collaboration with the Goethe Institute. How was your experience, or what was the intention of actually creating this or initiating this together with the Prince Claus Fund?
Ja, ich möchte erstmal Hallo sagen, Joumana.
Well, first of all, hello, Joumana and Maja. Well, first of all, I have to say that we would have done this here before the start of the conference at a coffee, but it's wonderful to see you on the screens. And Joumana and myself had a phone call 2 weeks ago, and we agreed that this is a good project. And by the way, I think it was born or decided upon in a cafe here in Berlin. We were sitting together and agreeing on our cooperation here in a cafe. So, in the 1980s, I took to the streets against nuclear weapons and against nuclear power. So there were huge rallies. Do you still have photos? I'm sure I still have some pictures. So there was a human chain from Ulm to Stuttgart, 110K. So these were huge rallies at the time. So this has always been an issue that is close to my heart. And also for the Goethe Institute, this was a big topic. Not only since we launched the project, but yeah, we have launched other projects on this. And before the event, I looked at the calls. It's a lot about rivers, it's a lot about water pollution, it's a lot about deserts. It's a lot about pushing the natural habitat into the background by humans. And what I've also seen, and my formulation earlier was a bit more general, what can art do? Art opens spaces, art opens access, a different kind of access to these topics in order to understand them better. But I took a look at them in detail. So first of all, I think that art has the function of documentation. I remember a time in the 1990s when the big oil pest was of Exxon. I remember this bird that was full of oil. I will never forget this picture of the bird. And this is what Maja and Khalil said. It is documentation, but it is to understand nature as a subject. Nature was screaming and crying, and I think this is what art can do. And then networking. We connect artists, but also very young people. Last weekend, we had a hackathon for climate change with 250 young scientists and academics who asked themselves, how can we use artificial intelligence to combat climate change? And the third subject is waking up. So shocking other people, showing people that art can present things in a way that deeply moves us. And a fourth aspect is what a cultural institution can contribute, its best practices. I mean, all over the planet, we have all kinds of different stories how artists and civic initiatives deal with environmental pollution. And to collect and bundle these stories is our idea. We have one project, it's called Future Perfect. And this is maybe the fourth contribution that art can make. And I'm really pleased that with this Prince Claus Fund, we have found a medium or an opportunity to continue to work on this.
That art can really bring to it in education. Yeah, you mentioned it's a documenting function. Then it's about this disruptive, this really initiate, drive change. Yeah, but then once actually change is happening, it also needs to be sustained. Yeah, so we really need to take it into new routines, make it part of our modern new narratives, our new frameworks around it there. Yeah. So, and I would like to hear back from perhaps Maja and Joumana around it there. From your perspectives, is you're coming from different countries than Germany around it there. So, is in your countries, in your perspectives, the same roles for art, or do you see some of those functions more important than others? Maja, sorry, we need to just wait a second until the sound comes up for you.
Okay.
Okay, now try again.
Yes, so I'm saying yes, definitely. The power of art to disrupt is extremely important, particularly, I mean, where I'm coming from Lebanon, where we lost confidence in well, in politics and all the normal channels. So art still has a possibility to bypass and to open different channels of communications and different channels of getting us together to fight for what is important, to fight for what we believe in, to have our voices heard. So when you talk about art and culture, they do have the ability to create spaces where we can conceive whether the climate catastrophe, we can conceive change, and spaces that are really definitely beyond today the confine of science and policy. In recent discussion that I had with artists and culture producers, there was a statement that was made that for the activist, change is the objective, whereas for the artist, change is a consequence. I believe today, when we are in times of crisis, artists, they can and they should aim to make change the objective. It's not enough anymore to make visible. We are all implicated.
Thanks very much, Maja. Joumana, perhaps a statement as well? Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, coincidentally, Maja and myself come from the same country, which is Lebanon. As you all know, there was the explosion in Beirut on the 4th of August. And in the neighborhoods where the explosion took place, actually it was the neighborhoods where a lot of cultural organizations and small cultural organizations had their homes. And what was quite amazing is how strongly the civil society felt towards going and safeguarding and helping out these cultural organizations. Because in a country such as Lebanon, cultural organizations have a crucial role to play, not only in the social structure, but also in the policies, but also in the history of what the country is, etc. And I mean, through the work of the Prince Claus Fund, we see time and time again, Maja was speaking about that change should be the objective for artists. We see time and time again examples of how artists are actually changing their realities and their contexts through the work that they've done. So I can cite, for example, a Colombian architect, his name is Simon Velez, who works with bamboo, and how he changed the law in Colombia in order to make bamboo a structured means to build in order to be more sustainable. I can also speak about, for example, Majun, who is from China and who has developed an app to be able to see all over China where the highest peaks of pollution are. And he gave the power to the citizens, so that it's actually the citizens who are putting on this app where the highest peaks of pollution are. Should it be air pollution or water pollution, etc. And how now the Chinese government is working with this app in order to ask big companies such as Apple, etc., to be more responsible in how they deal with the pollution that they are creating. So artists definitely have a role to play in changing the context, and they already are very much.
Thanks so much, Joumana. You both mentioned the statement change is not the objective, it's the consequence of an artist. I would like to direct it back to Johannes Ebert and to Thomas Krüger. What are your thoughts about this?
Ich meine, also das erste vielleicht mit Beirut, ja, unser Institut wurde dort ja
Coming back to Beirut, our institute has also been destroyed. And this was right in this neighborhood, as you talked about. And all the different people working in the field, in the arts sector, they have been supported, and they are supported by civil society and by different partners. And I think this is important for the different civil societies. So the structures are important, and it is also important to be active. And we also collaborate with other artists. So I think making change happen via arts and via artists is important. But what I meant when I talked about documentaries or documenting something and making change happen, then I referred to another idea of the world we're living in. So another project we funded was a very interesting project regarding cocoa agricultures of farmers in Colombia. We also we showed this project in the Humboldt Forum. So we had a 360-degree display of reality in order to show how this untouched environment can look like. But now it is destroyed because there is deforestation taking place. And I think this installation was really interesting, and it referred to this knowledge and also refers to change, because we want change to happen. And another project we also found it in Kazakhstan regarding music on glaciers. There were two artists, and they recorded different, the sound of the glacier melting. So this kind of, water running and all these sounds, and they brought it together and they created some kind of a concert of different sounds. And when you listen to it, then it's not only interesting, it was not only, like being in a concert and listening to it. People have also been moved by it and were deeply touched inside. And I think sustainability and climate change are very important processes, and of course they need to be handled, or let's say treated, by artists also at schools. We also fund projects or collaborations with children in Congo, for example, and I think these are very important projects.
Different roles can take different shapes wherever you are, in which cultural context around, and what's really important is creates this change of perspective. Take people out of the ordinary context, allows them to see in a different world. Herr Krüger, what are your thoughts around this?
Also ich glaube, dass eine ganz wesentliche Frage.
So I think an essential question is a precondition, or used to be a precondition for this idea. So a precondition for arts is to think about another space, to create another space. And this is also the same when it comes to civic or citizenship education, to rethink society, to think about a different society. And this is the same for arts and for visual arts. So thinking about outside the box, not only referring and thinking about the status quo, but to create new conditions, to create something new in order to facilitate, in order to create a new life, to enhance or to move forward, to boost discussions, to mobilize forces within society in order to create change and to facilitate change regarding climate change, deforestation, in the Amazonas, for example, or wherever all over the world. So important questions that need to be put in the center of interest in the public discourse, and to rethink different solutions, or to think about other ways of dealing with these problems. And I think arts and also citizenship, arts are open-minded, and politics or policy has a specific mission and specific objective. There's a very specific interpretation, but I think art can be seen or rethought in different conditions. So we also need to think about the supporters of arts, and also civic education, civil society participation is important. So people need to participate in the change. So I'm not talking about or referring to the power of politicians or economics in general. No, future is a space we need to think about. First of all, we have to create it, we have to shape it, and I think artists can, let's say, open up this antichambre, this first draft of something new, of a new world, and they can create a new world.
So we really need to create this protected space to actually let it room and get around it. Mr. Görgen, I know you haven't been part of that round here, but I would be really interested, you being part of a government agency around it. How does this go together, of having to actually go and have a policy and having clear objectives, and on the other hand side, creating those spaces to let it mushroom? How is this happening? I'm just looking at in terms of getting some lessons learning out here. It's all about, we're now just dealing with the pandemic and all the dynamics that are happening there, but it's also about what's coming afterwards. So how is this being now already thought through? Any immediate thoughts or?
Vielleicht zwei unmittelbare Gedanken.
There's two ideas. So first of all, talking about the pandemic, the lesson we've learned is that not only people are vulnerable, but also whole societies, they are vulnerable. And there is a huge impact, and what we need to do is to raise awareness, and people are already aware of what we need and how people can come together and what societies need, not only in their own societies, but also regarding the connection between societies. And this is the same, we can translate this into arts. So we need freedom of cultural institutions, because only art or arts can create counter models to our reality and create new ideas. And I think this is more than just talking about the freedom of speech, for example. So what we need is art much more than we thought during the last 10 years, and we need art more than the discourse or the narrative, because we have to rethink our, let's say, as human beings, we have to rethink our relationship to nature and to the future in general. So what we need is not only to open up our minds, but to open up our hearts. This is important. And I think we should not only think in political dimensions, but also in artistic or, let's say, creative dimensions. And this is my job, the question how to translate, how to put this, how to move this into reality and into politics, and how to realize this idea. And this is definitely a mission. Thomas Krüger is also very much experienced in this field, and this is also my mission, because I work in the Federal Foreign Office. So it's about supporting and also thinking about people and the different cultural
Thanks so much. Yeah, I think it all starts with the people, and then it goes through the institutions. Yeah, Steve Jobs once said it's very easy to connect the dots in hindsight. Yeah, but it's very difficult to connect them in anticipation around it there. And we're in the middle of such a journey, and the theme of our talk was around lessons learned. Yeah, so I would like to come into around our final statements. Yeah, and there is this proverb about never waste a good crisis. A crisis, a pandemic, is always creating windows of opportunity as well, things that have never been thought possible. Other things will actually get much more institutionalized than they've ever been before as well. So it can go in both directions. So in terms of taking the best lessons forward to go collectively as civic society onto that journey, I would like to give each of you 2-3 minutes at the end to summarize what kind of lessons would you like, or what kind of messages would you like to give us onto that journey of actually driving cultural change in a way that we've just described. And perhaps we can start with our two virtual guests, with Maja and Joumana. Yeah? Maja, would you like to start?
Yes, of course. Basically, the biggest lesson is that we need to be connected more than ever today. We need to create new spaces. And as artists, as artists and as collectives and interdisciplinary collectives, we need to reach out so that we inform the public and we get together, because an informed public can vote into politics the people that can make change and that can pass legislations. So this is a very big role for the artists today, but not only as artists, as part of communities and as citizens. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Maja. Joumana, would you like to continue?
Yes. Yeah, I think if there's two things that we've learned from the pandemic is that, climate change has no boundaries, basically. So today the pandemic is an extreme case, but even if you look at other cases, you can see how the climate change affects all over the world. So that's one thing, there's no boundaries. And the second thing is that with this pandemic, that was an extreme case, we were really able to reach out and to stay connected in very different and innovative ways. And I think this has been really a learning curve for the Prince Claus Fund and for the partners of the Prince Claus Fund, but for many other people. And what I would like to end by quoting one of my favorite philosopher. He's from Martinique, and he speaks about the importance of changing by exchanging without losing oneself. And I think you touched on it, that the importance of basically being able to see the other's perspective in order to know how to change and how to while continuing to be oneself. So that I think is very important in today's world, to offer a different perspective and to see how to build on that.
Thanks so much, Joumana. Johannes Ebert, you would like to go next?
Yeah, just three things. The first thing is that all of a sudden we are in a totally situation, and very rapidly, very creatively, and very courageously we all responded. That really impressed me, I have to say. And I'm also speaking about the Goethe Institute itself now, and I really hope that the feel that you can be rapid, creative, and courageous will sustain when this pandemic is over. I hope that this feel and feeling is still with us. And then Maja said something very important. It's about communication, communication, communication. And then the third point, we can do a lot with digitization, with digital media, with digital tools. We can do much more than we had thought before the pandemic, but we also need interpersonal encounters, and we need spaces where people can personally meet. I'm really yearning for this, and I wouldn't have expected this, that it's such a yearning. Thank you, Johannes Ebert.
Missing that human contact. Yeah, it's in the end, we're really social beings, and yes, it's so much more enjoyable as well to discuss face-to-face and actually experience other people. Andreas Görgen, would you like to continue?
Vielen Dank. Aus dem Neuen oder aus dem Erlernen von Verletzlichkeit.
By learning what vulnerability is, something positive can emerge. And this is more carefulness, more mindfulness, and this also changes our understanding of humanity, of our own position and our responsibility to nature. And this brings us to the topic of sustainability, but also our understanding and concept of equality, because the pandemic is a global one, and it is also about a different concept of diversity within the concept of humanity. And working on this, continuing to work on this, continuing to develop this is a political mandate. And Europe plays a specific role in this, because Europe is the continent that exploited other continents. Europeans just went somewhere and said the nation state is now the solution to secure peace. And I think this is now being questioned. And it is high time to learn lessons, to learn more lessons from this. Thank you.
And Herr Krüger.
Well, I think that the pandemic has reminded us of us needing a culture of unlearning. So what we have done, what we have thought so far, is now being challenged and questioned by many different limitations. And to deal with this means to start to question what we have done so far, to unlearn what has been successful so far. And in this context, it then becomes important that we finally learn again that other options are possible, that there are spaces for opportunities that we need to discover. And this brings us back to Hölderlin, who has already been quoted today. So indirectly, he said, hexameter, friend, come to the open. So he asked us to discover new spaces, to facilitate future, and to question old-fashioned things, and to replace old-fashioned things with new ones, with new ideas. And I think the crux of the matter is to connect these spaces of opportunity with mindfulness, carefulness, sustainability and solidarity, so that the resources of this planet are not wasted away but are secured.
Herr Krüger, and thanks very much for all the panelists, Maja and Joumana joining us virtually here. We would really love to have you here on the stage with us, perhaps next year. And thanks so much for the panelists on the stage for setting a really nice scene for the conference to come. I think we have lots of really interesting topics and debates ahead of us. And thanks so much for making the way coming to the Berlin Congress Center for us. And I think we get some music now. Cool.
Le soleil ici se m'aianta, mais la tombe l'amour c'est au m'aianta. L'amour ici c'est au m'aianta, mais la neige est pour tout enfant. L'amour ici c'est au m'aianta, mais la tombe l'amour c'est au m'aianta. L'amour ici c'est au m'aianta, mais la neige est pour tout enfant. 1, 2, 3, 4. Manito belle, Mayanta, regarde-moi, Mayanta, Manito belle, c'est tout pour la liberté Anna, Mani give me to my belle, Mayanta, oh Anna, Mayanta, Mani give me to my belle. C'est tout pour la liberté Anna. Liberté, liberté, voilà, madame là-bas, Mayanta, elle fait tout pour moi, et moi je fais tout pour la liberté. Et j'attends la révolution, Mayanta, mais le soleil brille, Mayanta, je suis encore ici, moi je fais tout pour la liberté. Liberté, liberté, voilà, attends-moi là-bas, Mayanta, elle fait tout pour moi, et moi je fais tout pour la liberté, et j'attends la révolution, Mayanta, mais le soleil brille, Mayanta, je suis encore ici, et moi je fais tout pour la liberté.
Thanks so much, Il Civetti, for creating those small but very, very important little breaks for us. Before we go on to our next point, it's about how we're going to reconcile climate change and democracy, and have Maja Göpel with me on the stage. Maja probably doesn't need to have a big introduction around it here. She's been at the forefront of initiating and inspiring new prosperity models and driving transformation change in societies for a long time, and your book, Rethinking Our World, is basically in everybody's bag, on everybody's tables, at least to the people where I'm going to. So we're really curious to see how this connects now to the world of civic education and the arts. But we're also going to have Grace Maingi with us virtually on the screen, and she's going to add a few thoughts and comments from her perspective around it there. But I'm going to give an introduction to Grace shortly afterwards. So I would like to give the floor to Maja, share a few thoughts with us, and then we will have a response from Grace, and then we will have plenty of time for actually discussion. And for this part now, we have our online webpage where actually everybody who's joining us from all the screens across Europe and Africa and wherever you are, you can actually go and type your questions. They will lend us here on an iPad here, and then we will give it either to Maja or to Grace. Maja, very warm welcome.
Thank you so very much. I would like to thank all of you for setting this up, because it's amazing. Those of you that can't see the whole thing, it's a big hall, and there are all these different corners where people can do different things during these spectacular times. And for me, it is one of the signs of the things that we need to think about, the creativity in the face of boundaries. The creativity of adapting to changed circumstances and still make things happen. And the ability to cooperate and take unusual roles, try new things, in order to still bring about what we think is important. And this is where I will start, and I was very happy to listen into the first panel round, because I really love it when I've prepared something, not knowing what other people have or will be saying, and then I see all the threads coming together. So this will be an experience of exactly this, if you have listened before. I have brought slides, as scientists love to have some visualizations when things get a bit more complex, and then we can take them all apart when we're getting into the discussion rounds. So one of the things that have been mentioned here that I understand more and more often is not necessarily the normal way of looking at the future, is that we are shaping this future. In a lot of rhetoric and also in a lot of talk about what education should achieve, it is about preparing for the future that comes towards us. And to me, that is exactly one of the pitfalls when we think about agency. And agency is what I would like to put at the core of this whole input here today, and what I would like to share with you, because one of the most important things I feel right now is at times where things get turbulent, and COVID has only been the most recent addition to this, that we don't feel transformed, washed away, pushed in directions and without power, but we reclaim the possibility to be co-creating what is emerging, to find our strength, to find our contribution, to find our little tiny contribution it is in the big realm of things, but to still become active. Because that will reduce our fear, that will reduce our sense of anger. We have the topic of how do we come closer together again. If we try to step into other people's shoes, we might understand a bit more why they might be saying things. I mean, right now, I don't know about you, but I've been looking at the news in the United States so many times today, and it really struck me when you listen to the different news channels, how distinct the views on what is happening are being accounted, and how much this account of what's happening is obviously shaping people's realities, experiences, feelings, and what they deem to or think are legitimate activities in this context. So reconciling different parts that we've taken out one of the same event that shape into distinct realities that are really impacting what we experience and thus do is, for me, at the core of bringing together what I think never should have been separated, democracy and tackling the big challenges that we are facing on the ecological side, in particular climate change. Because for me, it is part of not thinking it together in the way that it should be thought together. And I will get into this because The Brundtland report from 1992, which was the first big report about an agenda, so agency being in there, something that we would like to do about the new insights that humans are changing ecosystems to a degree that it will backfire on humanity itself. And what I loved about one of the quotes in there was connecting with the image of 1968. So we had the arts and images and what they do with us in our perception of that particular reality, where from the first time humans saw Earth from space. Spaceship Earth was one of the terms that Kenneth Boulding coined in this context. And the Brundtland report says that this view of this networked, beautiful, fragile marble dispatched in big black space, the only spaceship Earth we have, would be an equivalent to the Copernican revolution, where we discovered we're not actually the middle of everything and the sun rotates, but we are rotating around the sun. And it should upset the human self-image to the same degree as that Copernican revolution has done. So fundamentally change the point of view, who we are, where we are, and what might then be our role, our activity in co-creating where we'll go. And so this is why I have 3 points in there. First, I would like to dive in. It's what I have to do because I come from the ecological background as this precondition to really say, why do we speak about Anthropocene today? And what is the challenge with this? And then how do we shape these transformations that the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals have put together, transforming our world as the subtitle, and obviously education being not only a goal in it, goal 4, education, bring that to people, but through the right education, all be able to bring about that whole agenda. And that's what UNESCO has made strong in its recent publications around updating the development or the education agenda for 2030. And I think it is the essence of what we have to hold on to. It is a means to achieving that end if we update education so it fits with the new reality that requires for us to get on track, getting out the knowledge and the competencies that a 21st century needs for us to have to maintain what we've inherited and to shape what we'd like to give on to our children. And this is why I think our power lies in exactly this, embodying in people this transform ability. And I always take this slide when I speak to people that are confronting sustainability scholars with this rejection, saying, you want to transform us. You want to tell us how we can live. You want to totally turn upside down what we're used to. And I try to embed it into the reality of the spaceship Earth and say, actually, if you flipped around the point of view, what we try to do is maintain, conserve a particular way of living that enabled humanity to flourish. And that's been the Holocene phase, the last 10 to 11,000 years, where, as you can see, the fluctuation of temperatures has narrowed to this comfortable time where the very most of human civilization took place, because we could predict the circuits of regeneration of the ecosystems that we're living in particular climate change in this case. And so now we're talking about the Anthropocene being a new moment because we're leaving this space where humanity has become more and more in numbers and has interacted more and more intensely per capita with that planet to satisfy what we've called a successful lifestyle or the developed world's role model. And that means that we have now such an intensity of influencing the balancing feedback loops in our ecosystems that we are shaping nature. And this means, obviously, that this is the new reality we should face, that it is our choice to either transform our ways of engaging with our ecosystems and to restructure our economies accordingly, or we'll have to face the transformation that is then brought to us, as COVID has now shown us, or more and more hurricanes and droughts, etc., are showing us too. So it's not about do you want to have a transformation or no. It is, the Anthropocene is transformation, and it is our chance to give it a direction. And this is where I think it is the other really important step. One is to say democracy was always a point of the principles of the Rio Declaration and sustainability. It's never been an eco-dictatorship, even though some people like to put it that way. The principles have always had information, justice in access, participation in shaping the ways that we respond to understanding what we are creating. And another one is the important marriage of social and ecological goals. And this is what this icon, yet another icon, a symbol that was so much stronger than all words and long declarations, to marry the social and the environmental in the context of the emergence of the Sustainable Development Goals. At that time, this planetary boundaries, which is the outer ring of dark green, trying to identify it's not only climate change, biodiversity loss, and other places where we really need to stop our impact being so strong, combined with a social floor, a minimum that all people in the world should have to be able to live a life in dignity and to be able to participate, have the capabilities to shape their future. And then we'd have this corridor, and that's what Kate Raworth, who brought out this symbol called the donut, the light green corridor, which, yes, it has boundaries, it has limits, but it means there is a fluctuating space, a just and safe operating space, what it's called, within which we can have a variety, a plurality of solutions, how to get there. But we have to understand that on the one side, those that are taking too much from the planet have to change their lifestyle so that others that don't yet manage to have the material base for them to be enabled to live those lives in decency can have more. And this is, for me, a sufficiency agenda. And sufficiency is always something in these rich countries where you're being told, oh, you want everybody to go back to the caves, and it's really not a very interesting narrative or perspective. But when you think about the original term, sufficiency it just means enough. So why is enough so terrible? It could be a very security-enhancing goal. It means for a lot of people that are not yet at that social floor, a prospect. It means more stability and predictability within which we can relax if everybody has enough. Ça suffit. Está suficiente. In other languages, it doesn't really have that connotation so badly. It really means, in kind of the actual situation and with my system, often it has to do with food and intake, right? Or that's enough information, sorry. It means that it's the right dosage. But we never speak about the right dosage that would make us happy. So this is why shaping transformations for me is to get at all those embedded narratives, embedded assumptions, embedded ideas and goals that we've inherited from the past in an old reality with maybe 1 billion people and a lot of planet left and very little material consumption per capita into the new reality without it being a very fit way maybe to look at what makes life worthwhile and how can we enable 10 billion people to live on that spaceship Earth. And so this is why the agency is so cool for me. That's a bit of transformation science, because we always, when we look at what are the solutions to the goals, I feel we tend to look at technologies, investments, so money, and maybe some rules that should change. But how are those used? How do they come about? Where do they come from? Who uses them to actually put them into practice? That's us. And this is why sense-making actors are so important, because they will co-create productive processes. You see, it's all about agencies, all about activity. It's not very thingy, our world, when you really deconstruct it, except for the big infrastructure. But everything that has change in it is relationships. And yes, they manifest in those social, ecological, technical systems, what we call them. Those are more resilient to change manifestations, laws, sometimes very difficult to change, sometimes faster if you put someone else on the Supreme Court. But the most important thing is that all of those, we should never forget, the ways that we have organized our societies impact how Earth can regenerate and how much we can take from it to then be feeding into those processes. And obviously, they're not just going to go away when we think we want them differently. They're embedding and shaping our freedom. And this is why Karl Marx once famously said, we're creating history, but not under the circumstance of our choosing, but under the circumstances inherited from the past. So yes, we can understand we can't just do everything new from scratch, but we can start thinking about which of the solutions still make sense and which of those do we want to free ourselves from, to be able to bring about what we now see fit for the new reality of the 21st century. And this is why, and it ties back to things that were said on the panel as well, if the goals and ends of a system, ever more material growth, are in question, then creating more of the same with a bit less resource intensity, a bit more energy efficiency is not going to get us there, and all the well-being studies show that. So it is innovating around the purpose, to ask the question again, what is this new self-image? What we'd like this spaceship Earth to look like, to feel like, when we have recreated it and gotten out of the threats that we've discovered and shaped it into something beautiful and new. And this is the final bit then, this transformability. And I think it's amazing news because I've looked at, it's not that the current educational system isn't criticized. I think wherever you go, you can look at it. And I've gone through different backgrounds, not only global citizen education, but also others. And I'll show you the massive overlaps, because that's encouraging, because then we have potentially a huge coalition that can push for a proper education revolution. So the transformability that we want to get to is a capacity that lies in people to create untried beginnings. So really anticipate from the future, where do we want to go, from which to evolve a fundamentally new way of living, when existing ecological, economic, and social conditions make the current system untenable. For that, obviously, we should say, okay, we might want something new, so let go, in order to be able to open up for the new and welcome it. But how do we do that welcoming? And this is where the overlap comes in. Because we see it's not only about knowledge, and it's certainly not knowing how to use a whiteboard and a smartphone as someone who's just a user. It's much more. It's about what is your part of reality that you consider relevant to your existence? Where do you see the relationships connected to that you know you're part of? Which types of typical processes have we created, and how can agency unfold in those? Who's got more, who's got less? What does that mean if we want to say everyone's equal? Next one is from Future Skills, which is more the economic side. So this is from the World Economic Forum, when they say, what do people need now in the 21st century? They come more from a digitalized world, from very fast processes, lots of complexity, uncertainty. VUCA is one of the terms, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. But interestingly, they also come to the point of, it's not only knowledge, it's a lot about competencies. And a wide array of, literacy was basically the term to say, I'm able to decipher what's happening there. I'm not only able to apply. And then character qualities, how do I, with my competencies, relate? So there's a clear normative or ethical stance in those future skills as well. Digital intelligence education makes very clear that digitalization is such a force reshaping our societies that we shouldn't just be able to use the end devices or code a bit, but really understand how much the change of relationships and perception of the world that we then take as our reality with which we make sense and engage is being manipulated and influenced or freed. It can be either way, obviously, by this immersion with a totally new technology that reshapes the way we're connected, that we consume and that we communicate and that we do transactions. And there you also see it's not only screen management and what you can set your apps to do automatically for you, but it is about us being agents in that space and us being co-creators of how much digitalization is embedded in our societies. And finally, the OECD Learning Compass 2030. I find that so encouraging because the OECD has such a strong standard-setting role in what is education, what it is for. And when you look at 1951, it was very clear that it was justified that most people should have access to education because then society would have more economic growth. So that was the purpose there. But now they've gone in and said, okay, and the former tagline of that was learn, unlearn, relearn. So that ties back to one of the things that was said before as well. So how do we vet the things that don't help us see the 21st century challenges? And obviously you see a different goal, well-being, rather than GDP growth. And you see, again, values and the way that we conduct ourselves and protect ourselves is at the core of that compass as well. And this is why transformability, and this is the conclusion for me, is something like a new social contract that we want to enable as many people as possible to become co-creators of our common future. And what I see currently is this rising of populism, this rising of mistrust in our public institutions, and a really sad observation right now of an entire big country where the mutual mistrust has gone so big that it's only about who's put more fraud in the collection of ballots. So complete mistrust in anybody wanting to adhere to principles of democracy. So how do we create not only competencies and capabilities, but the spaces and the processes that I think Maja had mentioned before as well, and to make sure that the values and the attitudes in us that are a compass when it gets very VUCA are something that we speak about, that we make part of the conversation. And to address the Anthropocene with something I like to call heroic humbleness, because we need to throw in all we can to shape it into a positive future, but at the same time, we shouldn't think that we're the ones that actually make nature. We're part of it. And with this, humility, move forward as well in the continuation of how we intervene in that network of life around us. And this is why my final quote, which I really, really love, is from Carrie Facer. Our responsibility today as educators in these troubled times is to support our students to name and understand the troubles we're facing. Don't just pretend everything's fine. To think with hope and with rigor about the sorts of futures that are being made today, and to enable them to care for, imagine, and make livable futures in collective dialogue with others whose futures are also at stake. So from othering to belonging, a social contract. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Maja. Very, very inspirational. We have already the first few questions coming in, so I would like to encourage everybody who's been listening to us on the live stream, please go and share your questions and your comments for Maja and for Grace later on. They will pop up on the screen here for us, and so we can answer and collect them later on. Maja, you've created really this term about heroic humbleness, which is really wonderful. I would like to come back to that afterwards. But before we come with a few questions back to you, I would like to get a second opinion or a comment from Grace Maingi on it. Grace, are you? Yes, you're with us already. Great. So Grace, you're a thought leader and strategist working a lot in the governance and democracy spaces based in Kenya, but you also are the executive director of the Urara Trust and also working in a lot of different boards and initiatives focusing around education and community strengthening around it there. And so you're living in Kenya, so you probably have a very different perspective on a lot of things. What are your thoughts around what Maja has just shared? And we're very, very curious to learn your views.
Thank you very much. And I really do identify with what Maja has actually said, despite living quite far from where she is. The reason why I identify with what she said is because the key words that I've picked out are transformation, values, attitudes, knowledge, and competencies. So how do we, as civic educators, combine these to be able to transform our nations, but also to ensure that we have agency? So I'd like to share a little story in terms of some of the work we have done in creating agency. There is a community in Kenya called the Meru community, and they have a council of elders, traditional elders, who have traditionally kept the traditions of the society. But what we saw in that particular community is that because of the effects of climate change, there were a lot of conflicts with neighboring communities and challenges around drying up of rivers, challenges around access to resources, and challenges around pasture. Now, because of the ability of people within the community to have particular knowledge around climate change and being able to speak with the elders, they were able to get them to see their role and tying up their role in terms of conservation and also with their role in terms of being elders in the society. So we're in a community where we had young people chopping trees by the river because of needing to have a livelihood. The elders were able to come in and have discussions with the community and say, part of our tradition is preserving the environment. So I link this to what Maja has said in terms of not only do we need to unlearn, but we can also hold on to traditions that have been able to preserve our nature, preserve the environment. And through this interaction, the elders who are traditionally seen as enforcers and seen as probably things we need to move away from in terms of tradition, were able to come in and strengthen environmental conservation, able to see the link between the conflict and also then the drying up rivers and the effects of climate change. For me, also from what Maja has raised is with regards to how do we unlearn, but also how do we further the agency that we have? How do we ensure that as educators, we are being able to have conversations with people to break down legal perspectives in terms of sustainable development? In Kenya, we're lucky that our constitution actually recognizes sustainable development as one of our national values and principles of governance. But it's a term that ordinary Kenyans or ordinary citizens would have a difficulty in understanding. Same with climate change. And so how we've broken it down is explaining that if you cut trees, if you dig and are able to undertake activities that harm the environment, it does come back. It does come back and affect us. And being able to break down that information. So one of the great things that has happened more recently is the Kenya Forest Service in Kenya has been having education sessions with communities that actually have been living in community forests. So for the inhabitants, the forests are part of their community resource. And so they would not understand why they are being evicted out of the forests. But when the strategy was changed by the Kenya Forest Service to educate the communities as to the effects of them living in the forests, cutting the trees, and how that has led to further degradation of the environment, the communities voluntarily left the forests and are moving out to ensure that there is conservation. So how can we as educators be able to break down terms that probably are difficult for ordinary citizens to understand? And how can we then use systems that we have in our communities to be able to lead to that transformation that was being spoken to? And even using art and culture that was spoken to in the first panel. I'd like to also just point out that when it comes to the effects of climate change, we can use democratic spaces to be able to advance conversations around climate change. One of the things that we've been able to do is to interweave discussions around civil and political rights to the discussions around economic, social, cultural rights, and within that, bring in the thread of climate change and the need for communities to conserve environment. What we have seen is that our traditional cultures actually did have measures and ways to conserve the environment, but those have been eroded by modernization, urbanization, and socialization to be able to take on board other cultures. But being able to go back to some of those traditional practices in a way that helps the environment is something that we're seeing as very useful, especially for rural communities. So even as we in I'll say sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of our civic education is done by civil society organizations. There are some countries where governments do take on that role, but there is a place for civil society to enable to transfer that agency to communities, to individuals, to be able to rise up. We've seen growing conservation communities whereby they are able to conserve whether it's wildlife within their particular regions, once they have the understanding and once they're able to see the linkage between climate change and also then conflicts that will arise out of limited pasture or challenges around access to water. We have been affected greatly by floods as well. The irregular weather patterns does affect food security. So being able to bring to the national conversation the link between conflicts that we have and tying it to food security, but also tying it to democracy and tying it to spaces whereby people are able to engage in terms of shaping and creating narratives of engagement. So how do we, through this platform, in this conference as participants, and all those who are tuning in, be able to use the agency that has been spoken about? How can we be able to interweave in the work that we do, the discussion around climate change, and breaking it down in a way that ordinary citizens are able to understand and appreciate? And I really like what was said in terms of tying in values, attitude, knowledge, competencies, but also us thinking forward in terms of what are we gifting to future generations. So how do we ensure that we have the enough principle that has been spoken about? How do we ensure that we're not only having an extractive mentality that we must just take and not regenerate? And we can interweave that into conversations about democracy. So as much as I'm quite far away from Maja and very inspired by her discussions, I really do identify with a lot of what she has said. And how can we ensure that this conversation in terms of globally changing our mindset about being extractive to really thinking about regeneration? And we must take climate change seriously because it is affecting livelihoods everywhere. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Grace, for sharing your views with us. And a lot of things that really seem to just come up again and again and again. Yeah, it's the agency, it's all about the people, it's about actually unlearning and coming back to the things that really matter around it here. And also all that the cultures actually had all those elements, and then what happened to us? Yeah, they've gone for whatever reason, for whatever dynamics around it here. So what actually would it take us, and how could we actually, what can we do about it there to bring those necessary elements back that are fitting then in our modern context around it there? We have already quite a few questions coming from the audience, and I would like to go and address them to both of them. Maja, there's a big screen for you where you can see them as well. So the first one is about if transformability refers to the present economic, ecologic and social circumstances becoming untenable, which they obviously have, then why are we not changing the way how we should? Yeah, it's so obvious what needs to be done. Is why is it so damn difficult? And perhaps get a response from both of you. Maja, would you like to start?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the elements I'm really still surprised about is that we in our sustainability bubble, and I consider some of the educational programs that have engaged with global citizenship and have been part and parcel of the Sustainable Development Agenda, we still underestimate that this knowledge of them having become untenable isn't reaching everywhere. I'm seriously surprised when we did start this movement. Well, it's not really a movement. We just kind of spoke out as Scientists for Future, a year and a half ago, when the Fridays for Future movement, young people in the streets were being confronted with pushback from the political space saying, that's all right, but you now go back to school and leave it to the professionals to sort this out. And you can have one climate change day a year, and then you can all become engineers for whatever, sustainable technologies in something like 10 years' time. And obviously that was taking away their citizenship. Because they weren't in the streets to be told to go back to school and learn a bit more before they were actually allowed to say that they want politics to change. And if they don't have a vote because they're under 18, that's their way to raise their voice. And at the same time saying that they don't know what they're talking about, for us from the scientific community, when they're citing our studies and have read them, unlike maybe some of the people that were making the kind of laws or telling them to go back to school, we felt now is the time to speak up and get out there and just say, no, what they're saying is totally right from the analytical point of view. It doesn't mean that solving the problems is easy, but unless we are actually agreeing to this and saying we have to let go of that former, the new can't grow as fast. Because we cling on to what we're known, or what we're comfortable with, what we've become kind of familiar with, what our stakes are involved in. It's very difficult for people that are privileged under the status quo to accept that things might change. So gaining freedom, changing something, improving something might very well mean losing freedom in terms of privileges and possibilities to impact how things are going, or also being taken away, things that you've become comfortable with. And so it is not easy to then find the how. We still haven't fully agreed with everybody that it is actually there. There's still people that are saying, so what's the problem? We're just going to decouple. And we're trying to say, look, we've tried that for 40 years. It hasn't really worked. And then obviously there's this whole battle of who should change how much and no. And so this is for me where there is a huge moment right now where it does sink in more and more through the COVID pandemic, where lots of the routines have been intercepted that kind of drove us through the hectic days, to have the space at all to reflect, to find the calm and the anxiety that make us actively really think about the future. It's typically crisis moments that allow for this openness. And then we need the processes, and those are hampered by the social distancing, to believe that we can collectively find a solution. Because we have been very immersed in a very individualistic culture, and a lot of meism and me-firstism. And when you think about, the cake might not be growing for everybody anymore for always, you really come to the point of sharing. And we've kind of avoided looking at that in more detail, because we've had the growth narrative. There would be more for everyone from everything. And I think we're shy to actually confront the moment that in history we have not had many good examples being good at sharing without a lot of conflict. So those would be my thesis on that.
Great, thanks a lot, Maja. Yeah. And it looks like it takes those big energy injections like a pandemic or also to really reassess and challenge our baseline assumptions and narratives around it there. How is it from your perspective, Grace?
Chiming in on what you've just said, there's a famous quote that we shouldn't waste a crisis, and we shouldn't waste this opportunity, or rather, the opportunity brought by COVID-19. For me, what was of great interest when the pandemic hit was the studies that came up saying that in terms of air pollution had gone down, and even just in terms of animals being able to move around freely. We saw that in Kenya, because we didn't have so many tourists anymore in some of the game reserves. So how can we not waste this crisis to have this conversation and be able to help people clearly see, those who have agency, the effects of climate change? But to the question, why is it so difficult? It's because it's a power issue. Who holds the power? We have an imbalance. And so those who have the power, unfortunately, that is where then the challenge comes in, because you're asking those who have to release. And that's always difficult in any situation. So how can we be able to address that and work at that and chip at that? I think it, in some of the ways, is just clearly showing the effects of climate change, showing the effects of inequality that we have in all our cultures, in all our societies, high inequality. and being able to also see what further damage we're doing now. I think I was horrified when we would see videos of mosques sweeping onto shores because of how they had been disposed of. And yet looking at how creatures in the sea are being affected because of our own irresponsibility in trying to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. So how can we use these opportunities? But the reason why it's difficult is because we are trying to undo something that we have been used to and practicing for so long. But what it requires is for us to form alliances and for us to work across regions, borders, disciplines to be able to bring out the voice. So how can the activists work with the scientists? How can we work and amplify the children's voices that Maja was talking about? How can we give them that further agency? And how can we ensure that those who are holding on to the power and holding us hostage in some of these issues are able then to be chipped away at, because we have a great movement growing around this conversation? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Grace. Yeah, and putting the scientists and the activists, and then we bring in the artists as well that we've heard on before. Yeah, it's really bringing lots of different perspectives in. There's a second question which is very, very pragmatic of actually where do we start with whom, and then how to strengthen those new understanding of needed competencies. So where do we see the biggest opportunity, or where do we actually determine where to start? Or do we need to start everywhere at the same time?
Well, no, I think obviously you can do a targeted campaign. You can write recommendations in reports to the government to say, it would be fantastic to have a proper update of the educational system and put money behind it in a meaningful way, so that people that are fulfilling the educational roles today also can have training and support, so that they can actually embody all that new way. They need the new competencies as well. But we're shy of investing in this. And when you look at the recovery programs in Germany, it's all the technology that should save us again, including the care sector. So AI is now going to solve our problems in the care sector. I don't know. I think there would have been a real good space to put in reskilling. I mean, it's one of the things we talk about in the whole just transition discourse, about how do we reskill not only people in proper educational institutions now, but those that are already fulfilling jobs of which we know they won't necessarily be part of creating the future. But that whole thing is empty. As if investing in people was not necessarily a very good idea, because it doesn't necessarily instantly up GDP. I don't know what the exact reasoning is, but it is a really, really, really big gap for me in all those plans. And then I think in the first panel it was said as well, we are all educators to a certain degree, so we can start every single day, because we are in relationships. So us saying, where is that milk from, or where is that piece of clothing from, or why do we do it this way? Isn't there a different way? I mean, institutional setups where you feel might not be helpful anymore, this kind of process. In Germany, we have this famous phrase about, oh, it's not foreseen to be done different, right?
So
das ist so nicht vorgesehen.
Every day, in every area,
right,
use every opportunity that presents itself.
Exactly.
There is a next question coming directly related to it. There is what is actually then the role of educators? And if everyone is an educator there, should they actually go and teach revolution, as otherwise nothing is happening? Yeah, it's just providing and giving everybody skills and competencies is fine. Yeah, but if nothing ever changes, do we need to go a step further?
But how do you teach revolution? I think you can't say if it's going to be a revolution until it's happened, probably. So basically what you want to teach is to try to live up to your literacy in that moment, what you deem required. And if someone calls something revolutionary, fine. But it doesn't need to be something where you feel agitated, because that sometimes it's a kind of sense underneath it. And most of the revolutions that were successful, very, very peaceful. And I think they had a lot of that strong value connotation and the connection with the bigger thing. I mean, when you look at the heroes with Mahatma Gandhi or Desmond Tutu or Nelson Mandela, that everyone kind of looks to, that have managed to orchestrate change in a way that has not been as confrontational, it activates a whole different feeling in us than the heroes that we now see in the news every day, like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and all the others. And you can see the huge difference in them being focused on the old path and themselves more than the whole and anticipating what's possible in the solution. So if it becomes a revolution, yeah, maybe it, but we will only know afterwards.
Yeah. From your perspective, Grace, what is the way to change? Is it more evolution, or does it need to become a lot more revolutionary?
Let me start off by saying I think we must start where we have most influence and where we can be able to catalyze a lot of change. So start where we can make a big difference, and it then steamrolls into something great. And tying that in terms of what's our role as educators is to amplify. If I give you an example, about a year or two ago, we had a ban of plastic bags, the plastic bags you'd have in a supermarket or put your shopping in. And a lot of Kenyans were extremely shocked at how we're going to survive without plastic bags, because we use them to recycle, putting in the garbage in. But now, today, it's just become nature. That people have to go with woven bags to the supermarket and be able to go home with their groceries. But that was brought in by law, but somebody influenced that law to happen. Now, what is our role as educators? How do you bring about, if you want to bring about change in that way, is amplifying the benefits of what had happened. So one of the things that people did is they took photographs of a particular county in Kenya where we had a lot of those small paper bags that were just littering the entire sides of the road, and took photographs months later where that had been cleaned off, for people to be able to see and feel encouraged and see, okay, we can bring about change. But sometimes a revolution happens, and when it's going on, you don't even think it's a revolution. It's only after when people look back and say, that was groundbreaking. But where can we put influence? And that influence can turn into something really strong to enable us to save the environment, but also expand spaces for democracy. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Grace. We have two questions going around degrowth possible with the world population going for 10 billion people? And will we have a chance to win the race between our growing needs and climate change? And a second one, similar related to actually, do we have to end capitalism in order to stop climate change? Any views on that one?
I try to avoid big terms because I don't think they get us anywhere. I would keep it as the same thing. If we really, really very clearly now go for how do we make sure everybody has enough, so high well-being at lowest possible ecological footprint, that for me is the progress narrative or formula that is now at stake. And whatever delivers on it, be my guest. If GDP or other things grow, then be my guest. I think it is exactly important to say what we want to measure, what should grow and what should stop, need to have physical indicators rather than just monetary indicators, because even if we were to get the prices right, there's always something that doesn't really let itself be measured in chunks and pieces, what we need in order to put price tags on. But systems, latest when we come to biodiversity, evade that whole thing. It works with climate change, with a CO2 molecule, but in many other places the methodological individualism that you need for this doesn't really convey the full picture. And if we then keep on changing and improving onto those physical indicators and the social indicators, maybe we'll call it green capitalism, maybe we call it something totally different. Equally, I don't care. Let's put forward what we like to see growing and what we want to stop in terms of destruction. And then find terms that speak to us. I think that was a very important element, Grace, that you said, which is one of the surveys or studies we did, why when we Vivir or Ubuntu or other things from other region areas were in the pattern thinking about what it is about, are similar to some of the principles and ideas about sustainable development, but are much closer to something that people have an emotional bond with and feel moved by. I think that is important too, that we really allow for a plurality of solutions to feel good for their particular cultural context and feel right and fitted there. But then to keep on learning and sharing about the patterns that have actually worked.
Yeah, so it looks like much more going for what we want, yeah, shapes that purpose and reframes the debate and not antagonize where we have to stop or we need to end, which is always a loose debate around it. Yeah.
And the big terms, capitalism,
yes.
socialism, growth, degrowth, I mean, they all go mixed up. Everybody understands some totally different underneath, but they're very clear that they won't talk to the person that says the opposite. Yeah. And then we're lost, I mean.
So if that's all is so much tied to those underlying narratives and paradigms and value systems around it there, and you coined that term of heroic humbleness. Yeah, if you would go down on the street and ask people about heroism, yeah, I think very few people would say humbleness is a heroic attitude. They would say rather like winning and strong and courage and audacious, whatever it might be. The next question is around how could we actually then set the education policy free from that growth paradigm and winning mentality or this competitive mentality, which seems to be so much at the foundation of actually making or enabling any progress at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it is exactly part of the things to reflect upon, like how much we're caught in that today and how much it seems like the normal way to do things and how much the psychology studies are so interesting where we always consider ourselves to not do these things that we would find very selfish or maybe mean, but we completely believe others would. So that should give us hope that when we feel we might not be so different from everybody else, maybe they all have the same thing, that they trust their own moral compass more than everybody else's moral compass. So if we get the conversation to that lower level of what does it mean for us to be human and what does it mean for us to feel safe and appreciated. The well-being studies are very good about this, and I think everybody that's ever gone through therapy or counseling or ever, they all understand that it usually touches on the elements of where does fear come from and where does love sit. And then we can start thinking about what are the cultural norms that help this to grow and what basically forces people to leave all of that at the door when entering their offices. And we've had the new work agenda, we've had the purpose, we have books like Bullshit Jobs. I mean, it's coming that people feel that they themselves are trapped in the way that we've organized societies. And that means we can liberate ourselves from a story and then maybe from traits that serve some people really well or incentive rules and then don't serve anybody else very well. And then we should reorganize what is allowing for us or pre-structuring our freedoms with how we can interact. And I think there is a movement going on in that direction as well, to really think about the paradigm of servant leadership, of looking at the whole, of a systemic approach, of knowing that the heroism story of the 21st century can only be team because it's too complex what we've created. You do need different competencies and capabilities. And all of the ones we call heroes have that, they just kind of silence it or hide it so that they can be the only ones. But to acknowledge the 1,000 shoulders we stand on.
Great. So there's actually something happening, yeah? So let's really give it the room. Grace, how is it from your side or in the country where you live in? What are really the heroic attributes, or do you see that actually being able to decouple from that growth and competitiveness mindset?
Well, we are really struggling with the whole issue of who people view as role models, if I talk about the Kenyan situation. Because unfortunately, role models are seen as those who have a lot of wealth, regardless of how they have acquired that wealth. And that's a concern that we have, especially for young people. So in some of the work that we're doing is focusing on values and values that are positive, and going back to looking at being conscious as self, that how can I be able to not think only about myself and being able to amplify role models who are positive. So unfortunately, we don't have a great history or current practice in terms of having good heroes or people we can look up to currently. But there is work going on in terms of trying to memorialize some of the past heroes and heroines who have been able to do great things, but history has not been able to document that. So influencing the younger generation by rewriting history, because also we have seen in our education system, whoever wrote the story, that's the story that is believed and taken forward. But we have seen that has influenced us in a very negative way in terms of how we look back on our past. So there are projects in terms of trying to ensure that stories of people who were not perceived by the government then as heroes is actually told. And currently, even documenting people who are alive now, following them and capturing their stories of great change and great selflessness. And I think it begins there in terms of our consciousness of focusing on ourselves and what that effect does to the rest of society. So how can I be comfortable having 3 meals a day when the person living next door only has no meal a day? How can that be normal? How can that be comfortable? And how can we then have values, shared values, and thinking through shared prosperity as a nation? So how can we be able to instill that thinking, not only in ourselves now with consciousness, but ensuring that our education system also instills that in our young people? But it's a long road ahead. We have challenges with our education system in Kenya, and even challenges in terms of how do we unlearn that you have to pass and you have to be number one to be able to make it in life. But being able to say, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a plumber, whether you're a carpenter, it doesn't matter, as long as you have dignity and you're with your family and so on and so forth. But it does take a lot of work to get there. But it begins, I feel, with consciousness, our consciousness of others, and being able to see the inequalities in our society. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Grace. There's another question connecting all the topics and changes that we need to gender inequality, racism, and violence. So how could we actually increase the impact of the work in those areas as well?
Well, I think the most important thing is to name them, right? Because there's also been a tendency to say that in countries like Germany, emancipation has happened. So what do you want, you feminists? Not quite.
Well, I think we have a way to go.
And I think if we manage to just name the things without aversion, but keep on pointing them out with an invitation for the others to also change, so that there is, and it's a very deeply liberal concept, I try to always say that equal opportunities is a deeply liberal thing. It's not a lefty thing. It is something that sits at the core of saying every person is born equal. And if our structures are so clearly not allowing for this to happen, then it is important to say it, and important to not be ostracized for saying it. And yes, I think that Gracie said it is going to be with power and power loss. And yet, if we manage to see things more systemically, I do hope, and I think it's been a strong movement in Germany, for example, from the male side, to say we should all be feminists. I mean, there are all these T-shirts going on, because they understand that there is something that's not about men and women, but a way of having a culture and a setup where there is a more variety of ways of expression, a more diverse way of talking, a more diverse ability to think about what might be at stake, different ways to communicate and bring people together. And if we manage to get that with cultural diversity and with other forms of structural violence as well, to really cherish diversity as a resource for stability. And that's actually Charles Darwin, interestingly, because he's read so wrong all the time. It's always about survival of the fittest, but he said, no, seriously, it is survival of those that are best fitted to the actual circumstances as they are right now. But if the circumstances change, we'd be really stupid if we made everybody the same, because then circumstances change and we're just going to all die out. So we need the diversity to be something that creates this ability for us to feel safe and inspired. I mean, where do you learn more from? When you talk to people you're already totally like-minded, you need those two to recharge. But where you get excited, where you get stimulated, is usually when you're letting something new touch you.
Thanks, Maja. I'm just checking these still remaining questions, and there's far more than we have time for, but there's 2 questions around transformability. One is around, oops, they keep on changing on the screen. So how can we give young people the real opportunities to transform something in their school or communities in order to go and develop those competencies? And another question around, in which countries or parts of society do you actually see the concept of transformability already being developed in people?
Mm-hmm. I feel that there are just different seed projects, seed networks, initiatives, and I've shown a few. There's a research agenda that tries to cover this, obviously, with education for sustainable development or global citizenship or dealing with complexity. And then there are always front runners, as with everything else. I know best, obviously, German context, and there is a big call right now on the European level to also say it is about changing the way that we educate. But there's schools that are just changing the curricula within the framework that they're being given by the state, that really try to make a whole institution approach of it. And for me, it is really about, when you think from a transformation scholar point of view, it's always talking to the pioneers and understanding from them what are the barriers for this to become kind of manifold examples, or scaled, as we might say, or duplicated. And so for me, it is really more about showing that it is not individual little nucleus anymore, but it is a growing wave. And to find these connections, and this is why I was so excited about putting the different skill demands from totally different backgrounds together and say there's a huge overlap there. So it should be a proper political agenda to say we're going to update it so education doesn't only become a goal, but a means for people to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals.
Great, thanks so much, Maja. We are coming slowly towards the end. Tomorrow we've got a full day of lots of parallel workshops and interesting talks all around the topics. And our main audience are people coming from the education space around it there. So I would like to invite both of you, Grace and Maja, perhaps just to share a final wish or guiding message for our discussions tomorrow. Grace, would you like to start?
Yes, in terms of just guiding the conversation moving forward for the next few days, let's imagine a world where there's prosperity and diversity. Let's imagine a world whereby we are actually laying a foundation for change that can be able to live beyond us. And how can we, in the various work that we're doing, be able to show the connectivity between climate change and democracy, but also being able to position this story within what we're currently facing, because books are going to be written about what we are going through right now in terms of the pandemic. So how can we ensure that we tell stories of hope? How can we ensure that we tell stories that we maximize on even this dire situation that we're in, and that we did learn from this crisis? How can we be able to show through art, through music, through different forms of bringing of culture, that actually we are caring for this, for the planet, caring for each other, and that we can be able to prosper in diversity. So that would be, for me, what I hope that the next few days will give us an opportunity to delve into, but also for us to see our commonalities in terms of our struggle around citizenship education, and to get inspired from each other in terms of what we're able to do wherever we are, and being able to just learn from each other and see how can we bring change where we are. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Grace. And the final word, final wish, guidance for us tomorrow from Maja?
Well, I think this is the time where the only thing we could do wrong is to think too small. And that we should never, ever lose conviction in doing the things that we're deeply convinced of just because it seems hard in a particular moment. Because I feel that there are so many willing to really deeply rethink what it is, what is at stake, and what their role could be, that we should never ever underestimate or even feel that we're alone. It's quite often just to start the conversation and to maybe go 3 rounds until you find the topic or the wording where you can click. So don't let yourself be pushed away by a first antagonistic thing or a word that really excites you in a negative way, but keep going to that human level.
Thanks so much. We're coming to the end of this point. Thanks so much to the audience for asking all those really inspiring and challenging questions. We could have easily gone on for another hour. Thanks so much, Grace, for joining us from Kenya. It must be already quite late for you. So thanks so much for spending your evening with us, and have a good evening, and hope to see you face to face at some stage. And thanks a lot, Maja Göpel, for joining us live on the stage here in the Berlin Congress Center. And it was really inspiring, and let's see that we go and take all your points on in our discussions tomorrow. Thanks so much.
For the invitation. Thank you, Grace. It was lovely meeting you.
Nice to meet you too.
Great. Tanja, we've got a Yes, Let's give him a hand. Even we don't have a live audience here, I think that was really inspiring talk. Tanja, we've got a full day ahead of us tomorrow. What do you have in store for us?
So for tomorrow, after all the inspirational input we've had today, all of the topics you've been given to reflect upon, it begins tomorrow at 10 o'clock with a talk on the European Green Deal and global justice. Tomorrow we also have 3 time slots planned where a multitude of parallel sessions will be running, so diverse. Please take the time to look at the program and decide where is the place for you. Where would you like to gain more input or add your own thoughts and be able to articulate yourself. The first of these parallel sessions will be beginning at 11:15. At 2 p.m. there is also another round of parallel sessions, and at 4 p.m. we'll have the final ones. At 1 p.m. we're going to have Citizen Education in Action. So these are real projects that are doing real things, and they would welcome an audience there to actually listen to what they're doing and what they have been achieving. So at 1 o'clock we're also going to be that will be the first session around the Citizenship Education in Action, and we're also going to be joining a further session after the next parallel round of talks. So again, the spotlight will be on projects in action. That will be at 3:30, and the final spotlight on projects in action will be at 5:30. To close the day tomorrow, it's going to be the ceremony of the Youth Democracy Award. So that's going to be taking place at 6 p.m. Young, Loud, United are the organisation behind this. So I hope that there will be plenty of viewers to value the efforts that are being made by youth today and those who are truly in action as we speak. So, Dirk, oh yes, and of course we end up with an outlook to the final conference day, but that will be at 7 p.m.
Great. I think that's it for our first day. Thanks very much for joining us, and see you tomorrow.